The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the third and final part of our Social Media Insight series. Today we're going to be looking at understanding social media influence, going beyond scoring systems. My name is Alistair Wheat. I'm the lead consultant for Social Media Insights at Gulkana. I'd welcome people getting in touch with me either during this session or to contact me via email or Twitter afterwards, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you what you think of the series so far and thoughts for future content as well. You can tweet us during this session at Gulkana, or use the Gulkana, preferably actually use the hashtag GulkanaSocial to put questions. There's also the question panel in the panel to the right, so if you've got questions you can post them as you go through. We'll have time for questions at the end. Like I said, this is the third in the three-part series. The two previous set parts were about looking at context and sentiments, and also about horizon scanning and listening beyond the brand. Both of those two sessions are now on our YouTube channel, so if you look up Gulkana on YouTube, you'll find recordings of both of those two if you've missed them previously. And today it's going to be on influence. We will also be putting this up on YouTube later, hopefully in a couple of days. There may be a fourth session. I've had some people asking questions that didn't really fit into the agenda for these three parts. So if we see sufficient demand for a particular topic, we can certainly extend the series and add other topics. So do get in touch if you have ideas for that. So today we're going to look at, first of all, what do we mean by influence? I work full-time in social media analysis. I deal with all sorts of clients, from consumer brands to financial services businesses, government sector, charities, consumer tech, and I'll often get RFPs as well. Sometimes people saying, "Oh, we need to measure influence, we want to influence scoring, etc." And actually, that word influence is probably one of the most misused words in social media, because it means all sorts of different things to different people. So we're going to look at some of the different things that people actually mean and why they need to know about who's influential. I'm also going to look a bit about playing the numbers and how to fake influence, because there's a lot of people out there who look influential but aren't really influential. I'm just going to explain how to kind of watch out for that and why it can be a bit of potentially even a dangerous distraction from identifying people who generally have influence. I'm going to look at the different types of influence. I've come up with 5 categories which all begin with A conveniently, so I've called them the 5 A's. We'll look at that. And then finally, I'm going to look at how to use peer review in social as a way of starting off with people who know influential, looking at who they're connected with, and then using some kind of community validation to spot the people who seem influential and see whether they've actually got some traction or clout with the people that you know have got influence either in social or in real life. So here's our Oxford Dictionary definition of influence. It's the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something, or the effect itself. So that's all well and good. So that's the official definition. But the reality is that when we're looking at social media, it's very rare that you have one tweet or one post will have an impact on someone's behavior or their character. So we're really looking at a cumulative effect here, lots of little things that together might sway somebody. And again, it might be just a short-term impact, that people do something over a short period of time rather than some long-term influence. So useful to have that definition, but maybe we need to go a little bit more in depth about specific things. So here's a clever chap on social media called Mark Schaefer. He's written books about social media and influence, and here's what he says about influence in social media. He says a badge, like number of Twitter followers or a clout score, may be the only mechanism we have to determine influence in the online world. Offline, where you have the chance to meet people or ask your mutual friends to help us determine credibility. But this type of validation is often not possible online. So we seek a shortcut, and on the social web there are plenty of them. Now, Mark's a cleverer guy than me, so I have to agree with most of this, but not entirely. So I'll come to this later in the talk, but I do believe that we can actually use sort of this mutual friend or this peer validation to determine whether people are influential. But it is true that often we do have to rely on shortcuts and other signals to determine influence. So whilst there are no metrics, there is no score about influence, no matter what people like clout, etc., may say. But there are useful signals. So first of all, got the obvious ones. We've got things like followers, fans, and subscribers. So if someone's got a lot of followers, you may think, well, that person is influential. It's useful to help us spot people, but it's just one of many signals that we can look at. Scoring systems are useful. This is not just going to be another clout bashing session. And I could pull up various examples of Twitter accounts or people on social media who've got high clout scores, and actually it's all wrong. And silly clout. How could they possibly think the person's influential? Well, yes, you do get that, but these tools can be useful. If someone's got a very, very high score, then they're going to have that high score for some reason. It may not be the reason that you care about, but it's going to be there for some reason. I would also say that some of these tools are actually most useful, not necessarily in determining who is influential, but who isn't influential. So if you're a brand and you get lots of mentions, or you're looking for a subject-based tracking exercise, then sometimes you can actually use these scores to filter out people who've got below a certain score. So it helps you get rid of spam bots and people who are just really talking to themselves. So these scores can be actually used in reverse to kind of take out stuff that you don't really care about, not necessarily purely telling you who is at the top of the tree. There are loads of really useful lists out there on social channels and blogs. So we've got places like Listed, Electionista, Twello. I could make a long list of lists. Maybe we'll put that in the blog and the resources afterwards. Useful places to go for lists and all sorts of categories. They can just help you get started. And I'll show you ways in which you can use those lists and you can build on them. And also you can maybe, if you take a list of 100, narrow it down to 10 using certain techniques and practices. Make use of real-world profiles. So if you are at an event, or you can see events that are taking place that you're not part of, look at the schedule of the speaker program, look at the hashtags, follow them when they're going on. You can sort of see who's actually getting traction at the events. I put Wakana on there because we provide a journalist database. I think most of the people on this call have a subscription to our media database. So we have got tens of thousands of journalists and bloggers around the world in different subject areas, and many of them have got social media profiles, especially Twitter. So it can be a good starting point, is just to look at people who actually are influential enough that they've been paid by a leading media outlet to actually write for them, and then they talk about things on social media. That's a good starting point. So people have a job where they're paid to be informed, to know what's going on, so you can start with that. There are also loads of really good research tools. So people like Tracker or Simply Measured, you can put in keywords, you can build up a profile, and then it will go into sort of, has a kind of database of profiles. They're also particularly good because they'll often have a profile for an individual across multiple social platforms. So they'll score that person across their Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn page, maybe Instagram, and maybe the blogs or news outlets where they talk as well. And so it gives you kind of an overall view. So again, these are all very useful tools. I wouldn't rely on any one of these on its own, but we will try and make use of these in combination with each other to really determine who the top people are. But having said that lists were useful, here's one of the lists I'm not a particular fan of, the Forbes Top 50 Social Media Power Influencers. They do it every year. Now, there are some people who definitely are influential and I really rate on this list, but there's a lot of people on that list I just feel like they're just playing the game to get on the list. So the other day I had a few people follow me, I clicked on their profiles, very nice photographs, their hair was done up nice white teeth, and they have this thousands of followers, and they're apparently on the Forbes Top 50 list. I didn't follow them back, and of course in a couple of days they've unfollowed me, because the only reason they followed me was because they were hoping that I'd follow them back. So this is a common game that you'll see. I'm not going to name and shame any particular ones. I mean, you probably have them yourself. Everyone's in this call on Twitter probably had people following them, and the pure goal of that is just to get you following them back. So that's often how people build up a high follower count and gain these scoring systems. There's also just the activity. There's a lot of really good tools out there that can help you kind of automate or semi-automate activity on Twitter, so you can follow news and then just regurgitate tweets with links to articles that are relevant. And as long as you're active frequently enough, often enough, you'll get retweets, you'll get people following you, and again, that kind of builds up the score. But how much attention is that paid? Just because this person has tweeted about you, they may not have actually read it at all themselves. So there's a lot of stuff activity going on there. There's also a lot of cross-platform posting. So something goes up on Twitter and immediately it gets posted on Facebook and LinkedIn and Google+. Often you see the hashtag to do the cross-posting with LinkedIn. So I'm not necessarily saying that automation or semi-automation is bad. Often these are good, sensible things to do as a brand, if you've got a brand Twitter account or Facebook or Google+, just to good to have lots of activity. But if you're actually looking at influence, sometimes people who do that too much can be a sign that they're not really going to be able to pay attention to you, and the sort of people that follow them and get duped by that maybe aren't the right sort of people that you want to have an impact with. So why to watch out for this sort of hacked influence? Well, someone who's playing the system, it can be a sign that they actually aren't really influential at all. People who really are influential generally don't need to do that sort of thing to get their kind of high scores and be listed in the right places. And often these influencers are really, the main agenda is to just build their own profile and just to seem influential. Often they have speaking opportunities, and that's kind of also how they make their living. So, again, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here. These people can be useful, but just to be wary that often there's a kind of a not a reciprocal thing in that they'll only do something for you if you also do something for them. I remember a few years ago a guy who was doing lots of endorsements and reviews for various social media tools, and another colleague who actually had a competitor saw this guy endorsing something. He said, "Oh yeah, so and so, he'll endorse anything for a free lunch," and you could really see that this guy's brand had been diluted by the fact that he'd endorsed too many things. And I knew that there was one who actually ended up speaking two different conferences by two competitors in the same day. So there can be almost like a social media mercenary. So you've got to watch out for these social media mercenaries that, just because you've got them to say something positive for you doesn't mean that there's going to be any real loyalty, and that they're actually not going to be endorsing a competitor the next day, and cancelling out some people that they've done with you. Also, any engagement with your brand can be very temporal and superficial, so they might retweet you, they may mention you in blog posts, but they've probably forgotten about it within a couple of days because they're just doing it so much. The activities, it's really higher than can generally be sustained. As a rule of thumb, if someone is generally influential, they don't need to say so in their profile. So by and large, if I see anyone following me or appearing on one of my lists and they say, "Oh, I'm a top influencer," I normally take that as a clue that they're actually not influential, because they really wouldn't need to say that in their profile. So what are we really after when we're talking about influence? This is actually very similar. What I've got on the slide, I put this together a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago actually, this slide. And then the other day I got an email almost exactly like this, when someone said to me, "Can you tell me who's influential on a particular topic?" It was quite a niche subject area. My response back was, "Why do you want to know?" And this is again the sort of question. If you are, there's quite a few agencies on the call, and you will have, I'm sure, clients asking you all the time, who is influential on this subject? Good question to come back on that is, why do you need to know? What do you actually want to do with these people? And the answer can really change how you think about influence. This also may be you're in the social media team or the PR team in a big business, and you've got colleagues coming to you saying, "Oh, I need to know who's influential on something." So we want to find people who can either help our content get noticed. So you may have your own social media activity, and you want people to start retweeting you or getting you more followers. It's all well and good. It may also be that you want to help. You want to understand who the influencers are, so you can really get a finger on the pulse and actually see what's trending and what's popular. And it can also be just a general source of reliable information, because you're following people who are plugged in, and you can actually get a heads up on what's going on before you read about it in the press. It's important to say that also quite a few of the conversations I have with people about influence, it's not because the brand wants to do any engagements. They don't want to really do anything with these influencers. They just want to know what's going on, and they want to be alerted if there's a potential risk or a threat to their reputation or their brand. So sometimes understanding influencers is about knowing who to ignore and who to really pay attention to. When should the alarm bells ring if somebody says something negative about your brand? And that could be in a part of this as well. It can also be about connecting you to key stakeholder groups. So you may look for somebody who's maybe not got a large following, but they're connected to a smaller but influential group of people online, and they're important to you as a business. These could, for example, be if you're a charity and you work in the health category, you may have people who are patient advocacy groups, or they're people who've survived cancer or something like that, and often they'll connect with each other. So that might be good for you just to understand how you can start to connect with some of those groups, but you need some kind of an introduction into the network rather than just trying to barge in yourself. So here are the 5 A's, the 5 different types of influencers. Here they are. We've got amplifiers, activists, advocates, authorities, and analysts. I think these are all kind of distinct types of profiles, but obviously there's a bit of an overlap, and somebody could be an authority and an amplifier. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. I'll explain the differences. So an amplifier, this is the sort of thing I'm talking about when I say amplify. So here's Cristiano Ronaldo. I think he's the most followed sportsman in social media. He's got something like 23 million followers on Twitter. And he did this tweet a few months ago. I think it was actually March, 12th of March. And it got retweeted nearly 23,000 times. This is actually one of his top 3 tweets. Normally he gets about 1,000 or 2,000 retweets, and this got many times more than that. So he says, I stand, hashtag with Syria, innocent children need our help, learn more about Save the Children here. So he's actually done about 8 or so tweets linked to Save the Children. And so this was actually a really important tweet for Save the Children, that it helped to catapult this particular hashtag and get it trending on social media, and then loads of other people started to see it and get attention. So amplifiers are really useful. They can provide a big boost to your social media campaigns. Some of these guys, Lady Gaga, like pretty much everything she says gets retweeted a bazillion times. She just says, good morning, and it's retweeted thousands of times because there's loads of people that just like zombies follow that. There is also, with a lot of these big ones, there's a lot of bots and a lot of automation behind that as well, which it can actually be useful just to get things trending. And it can be a great slingshot effect, like I showed with that Cristiano Ronaldo tweet, that helped to really boost that hashtag, get it notified to people, and it generated some momentum. So that it can be just a really good sort of one-off hit and one-off boost. And so if you're producing reports internally, it can also be good just to boost your numbers. But amplifiers can sometimes be seen as a gun for hire, and they can be a two-edged sword. I'll come back to this actually later when I talk about advocacy. So just be wary that sometimes getting amplifiers to mention you, if it's not a genuine thing, can have a detrimental impact. Also, the impact can be just very limited. So somebody might say something, there's other people who just retweet it just because they retweeted everything, and they'll have forgotten about it the next day. So it gives you a bit of a boost, but it's not necessarily that's going to be a long-term thing. And sometimes people, if the influencer, the celebrity, the amplifier says something that's not really their core subject area, people might not really take it seriously. Think, well, what does so-and-so know about this particular subject? And they can easily dismiss it. So, but quite often, people, when they talk about it, they get distracted by this amplifier group, and I think they're just one category of influence, albeit probably the most high profile, and people can maybe get a little bit too caught up in trying to get these guys involved. Second group, activists. So why are activists important? Well, activists tend to have much smaller number of followers, but the key with activists is that they work collaboratively with other activists. They know that on their own they're not going to have a big impact, so they often will coordinate their activity with other people who have similar views, and together they can have a much bigger influence, and definitely a much bigger influence than high-profile influencers just doing stuff on their own. Another key thing about activists is that what they do is driven by passion and dedication. They really care about the subject matter. It's not just a one-off thing that they're doing or that they've been paid to say. And so it's often much more likely to be genuine and to be respected by other people in social media. Typically also they are more interested in issues than brands or organizations. So they might not be so inclined to mention a brand, but they'll talk about the thing that you do. So what that means is that they can be especially powerful for charities. So if you've got a particular cause that you're trying to get people talking about, the activist groups may pick up on the cause, but they won't necessarily mention you as the charity, the organization behind the cause, but they can still be good to promote a hashtag or to promote something that's not brand specific. Brand engagement, that can actually put off some activist groups. So if you've got a cause that you really do care about, and or you're trying to raise money or trying to generate some political change, sometimes it's almost good to take the brand out of it to get the activists really going with it. And also can be dangerous for corporates. So, for example, Shell, repeatedly getting hammered on a number of subjects by activists, and Greenpeace is great at rallying people against them. One challenge with activists, though, is that they don't always listen to reason. Sometimes they're very entrenched in their views, and if you've got people, having a go at you or are hostile to what you're trying to do, it's sometimes very difficult to actually change them, and really, you don't really want to be wasting your effort trying to, combat these people directly on social media. So it can be really tricky to know how to deal with these people. One area where we've seen activists have a big impact in the UK over the last couple of years has been around the whole badger cull issue. For anyone who's not familiar with British culture, just one general no-no that you should always evolve is do not mess with small furry animals. If you do, you will invoke the wrath of thousands, if not millions, of British people who will, come out with their pitchforks and bring you down. So we saw, the government wanted to do a cull of badgers because they were infecting cattle with tuberculosis, allegedly. Well, not allegedly, I suppose they were, but a lot of people were very angry about this proposed cull, and so we saw lots of people who just were active on social media. They changed their profile pitch to have a badger in it, and they had that for months. They wrote that they were part of the badger campaign in their profile, and you had people creating social media profiles purely to campaign with it. So here's Badger Watcher 1, and this is a tweet saying, so many badgerists, so that's why they've called themselves, on Twitter today, I reckon we could have Badger Tuesday, still got it trending. So this is just them taking a photo, interesting, rather than a screenshot, of the top trends, which was Badger Monday. And we saw when this was sort of really, it's kind of faded away, to be honest, but when this was at its peak, every Monday, hashtag Badger Monday would be there as one of the top trends. So these activists knew this. They all got together and were talking at the same time, on the same day, using the same hashtag. They could get people paying attention to it. And they got media coverage. They had people getting interviewed, and they did protests outside of Parliament. So individually, there were some celebrities involved in this, but by and large, it was kind of a groundswell movement. So, so just be aware of activists. Another thing I'd say as well is that when it comes to crisis monitoring, often people will overlook activists to their peril. So you might have a celebrity or someone with lots of followers, and they say something negative about your brand, and it's like, oh, panic! We've got to be worried about this guy who's got lots of followers saying something about us. But the reality is that that person may tweet and everyone's forgotten about it the next day. Activists are far more dangerous because they're much more likely to build up a head of steam. It may take time to have some real damage, but it'll continue over a longer period of time. So the third group is advocates. So why are advocates important? There's maybe a little bit more obvious. So these are genuine fans or admirers of your products and work. And similar to activists, the impact of individual posts may be less important than consistent advocacy over time. And also, forums are important here because often forums have got their own sort of little ecosystem. People post anonymously, and you can get people who build relationships on forums with people. They don't know who they really are, but they know their forum profile, and often they're seen as sort of authorities and experts within that subject area. Normally, when we're looking at advocates, people will immediately think about things like I don't know, beauty products or fashion or healthcare things. But actually, they can also be really important in B2B. So you can actually see some of the people will actually talk about the service that they've had from a B2B supplier, or they'll recommend a new piece of technology. So B2B space advocacy can be really important as well. Increasingly, you're seeing business people using social media as part of their professional activity and the networking. So it's important to look at that in B2B as well. Also, attempting to buy advocates can really backfire in the same way that I was talking about the amplifiers being a bit of a double-edged sword. But building advocacy is great. So here I've got a couple of tweets from people talking about Debenhams. But the key thing with these people is that they're all actually fashion or beauty bloggers. And what we've seen is that for some reason Debenhams, I don't know whether it's a particular focus that they've got, but they've got a really good relationship with the fashion blogger community, and often they will talk about the things that Debenhams does, and they really like it. So they just actually have consistently over time referencing Debenhams, and it's they're a UK department store. And so that's the sort of thing that you want to build over time. Forums, so here's Money Saving Expert, a really big and influential forum in the UK. And you get this sort of process. The guy who's just posting a question about unemployment and protection insurance. And then you get this guy here, Dunstan H, posting a reply. And this is the sort of thing you get from this forum. So this guy has posted 73,000 times on this forum, and he's been thanked 40,000 times. So that just, if you just come new to this forum, and you've posted something, you've asked a question, and this guy replies, you think, wow, who's this guy? He knows his stuff. And almost people just take that, just that whatever they say as being a fact. So just be, if you have got forums where people talk about you, not just be aware of who the key kind of experts are in those forums, because if they say good or bad things about you, often people have gone to the forum with a question and they're just taken whatever that person said as the truth. And also with forums, these things are much more likely to have a profile in search as well, coming high in search results. Lord Sugar, if any of you don't know him, he's maybe from the States. He's kind of a bit like a British version of Donald Trump, but without the dodgy politics. So this is him saying he loves the Garmin UK Edge 1000. It has a large HD screen and full detailed maps, etc. It's got to be the best bike gadget ever. But really, I don't really know Lord Sugar much of a bike enthusiast. So this is the sort of response that he gets. How much are you being paid to say that? How much have they paid for that? Another freebie advert. Thanks, Alan Partridge, and blatantly not written by you. So, just be careful that the wrong sort of person, even if they've got a big profile on social media, if they're not really related to the subject area, you know, an advocacy can actually backfire people mocking it. We also saw this Ellen DeGeneres in the Oscars. She did that famous selfie tweet on a Samsung device that got retweeted many times, but she also then did a selfie photo backstage, and unfortunately, you know, did it via an iPhone, and that kind of again kind of made people sort of be suspicious about, you know, how much of a genuine brand advocate she was for Samsung. Authorities, fourth group. So these can be individuals or organisations, and they're often seen as a source of factual and correct information. This, yeah, they normally are perceived to be neutral and biased. The truth is that they sometimes are quite biased, but the perception is that they're there just to be, you know, untainted by brands, endorsements, etc., and sponsorships, etc. The key thing with these guys is that they're often invited to comment on other channels. So someone is an authority. They're often an authority not because of their social media profile, but they're active in social media, and they will often be brought into TV programs to talk about their knowledge and their expertise. So it's good to kind of see who they're linking with from social media, and getting maybe a heads up about the fact that they may be appearing on a show, or that they're changing their opinion on a particular subject matter. They can be especially powerful if they are really having a go at you or saying something good about you. So be very careful if you see an authority, someone who recognises as a subject matter expert, saying something negative about you in social media. Even though they may not have much of an impact on social, they may not get any retweets, just be wary the next time they appear on, you know, a TV news program, you know, as a subject matter expert, that might be the point where they actually hurt you with something that they say, even though their social media profile may be quite small. So here's just an example of an authority. This is fellow Dr. Asim Malhotra. He's got 7,000 followers on Twitter, so he's a reasonable amount, 2,700 tweets, and they're not very active, but he does, you know, talk about what he does. So he mentions that he's, you know, meeting an MP, he's just read a study, and he's, you know, sharing that, and he often shares links to articles that he's either been quoted in or he's mentioned. But this is the key and why he's important. So he gets mentioned in The Guardian. This is some articles he posted in The Guardian, and then here are a number of articles he gets mentioned in the Huffington Post. He's also on the BBC, he's been in the Mail. So he appears on lots of different subject matters, and he's particularly been going on about diabetes and sugar. So, you know, fast food brands, be wary of what Dr. Asim Malhotra says, because he definitely knows his stuff. And if he really has a go at a fast food chain, that could be very damaging, not necessarily for the social media profile, but it can hit mainstream news outlets. And also, you know, an authority, this is the CIA's first tweet. When they appear on social media, they can very quickly have a massive impact. So I like this particularly witty tweet as well. So that got retweeted 300,000 times. So, you know, authorities can sort of always come out of the blue into social media and already have a big impact. The final group, analysts. So analysts are important because they often will place importance on being the first with new news and early reviews. They have more of an interest than other categories, I suppose, in fostering relationships with businesses and brands. They also value the inside track and access to info of people that others don't have access. So, you know, and these are the kind of people who respond especially well to being brought along to some kind of, you know, tour of the premises or the factory, or being able to preview a new technology, getting their hands into new kit. These are the ones who respond best to that. They also network with other analysts. They know who the other thought leaders are, and they'll often read what the other guys are writing. They may have, you know, friendly rivalries with other analysts, and they'll often critique what other analysts do and say. The thing, though, with the analysts is that they often have a focused interest. So whilst they may be, you know, very strong on the subject matter that you want to deal with them on, if they say something outside of that, they may have very little impact at all. So just be aware that, you know, the analysts, you know, especially if it's a very niche subject area, can have a big bang in that, but don't really waste your time trying to get them to talk about things that are outside of their domain. Here's an analyst I have a lot of time for, Robert Scoble. Been following for a number of years, and he's really a top expert on wearable technology as well as a number of other subjects. And he's always, you know, he's very open. He often review and talk to people across a whole variety of different companies. He covers the startup space extensively. He's been brought on by Rackspace as a brand ambassador, but he's not, you know, just purely out to beat their drum. But, you know, this is the sort of guy that, if you've got some tech, you know, he's great to connect with. He'll often respond very well to getting some new information and inside tracks. So there are people like him in other subject areas as well. So I'm actually quite curious now to know, just as I've gone through those 5 different types of influencer, just for the people listening now, I'd be just interested to know which one of those you actually find most importantly. So I'm actually just going to run little polls now and see the question as this is coming up. Okay, so I just want to see what people say. I've got a hunch about which one of these categories actually people think is the most important. Results coming through now. Okay, well, let's run this for a little bit. I think what we'll see is interesting here is that it's quite clear. I think the results seem to have settled on a number there, so I'm just going to close that. So in first position, we have advocates on 33%. So a third of you have said that advocates are the most important type. That is what I would have guessed. I actually thought it would be higher. I thought it would be like sort of 50% or more people might say advocates are the key thing. But then following that, we've actually got a tie in second place between activists and authorities, both on about 21, 22%. And then in last place, we have a tie between amplifiers and analysts. So again, I find it fascinating that we're talking about influencers, but actually, just with the audience we've got listening to this webinar, we've got very differences, quite a different range of opinions about what sort of influence we really need. And we've got a large range of organisations represented on the call. So if you are in an agency and you talk to clients, it's really key to really try and drill down and find out what the client wants to get out of this, because we can make assumptions about what people want, and that'd be quite wrong. I just want to kind of wrap up fairly quickly now, just through a bit about peer review. So if I come back to this quote about asking a mutual friend, I want to talk about how there are some tips on how we can actually do that. So one useful way to start off, so if you are looking to get an idea of who's influential on a particular subject matter, actually sometimes Google is a good place to start, because there often are lists out there across all sorts of different places. I mentioned lists before. They're a UK outfit. Got some good technologies. They've got some lists here. I'm actually speaking of big data. For those of you who were in previous sessions, I remember we talked a bit about big data previously. But they've got a list on there about big data influencers. So they've got 100 people on that list. What I've done is I've actually grabbed all those profiles, and I'm just going to track everything that they tweet about, because they all talk about big data. And what I can see is that on that list of 100, in the last year, some of these guys have hardly ever mentioned anything to do with big data. So Jeremiah Owyang, he's a very respected expert in a number of subject areas, and there's also Robert Scoble on there, but they've hardly mentioned big data. So if you're looking for big data influencers, do you really want to be targeting those guys? Because maybe they cover their attention is maybe a little bit too broad, and they're not talking about your subject area enough to really latch onto it. And the other thing I've done, this is I'm using Social Media Pros as the technology we have powered by Brandwatch. So we're actually aggregating all the tweets and looking at who's been mentioned the most. So of that list of 100, I can actually see this guy Kirk D. Bourne. He's actually been mentioned nearly 1,000 times by his peers on the subject of big data. So that's a good clue to me that perhaps he is the most important influence, because that's what the peers, the other 100 influencers, are actually referencing most. Another thing I did on here is that I actually looked to see if I can extend my list of 100. So maybe I can take a few out, like I showed you that there are some people on that list who don't talk about big data that much, so then I want to remove them. But I can see there are some other people that are not on the list at all, so but they've been mentioned. So I've got my 90 or 100 people who talk about big data regularly, but they're actually mentioning some people who are not on my list, so I can add to it. So this guy, Bernard Marr, he's a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and he's a big data guru. Okay, and he's actually got nearly 80,000 followers. And he's not on this list of 100 big data influencers, but he's been mentioned by them a heck of a lot. So it makes sense maybe for me to add him in. So I've got my peer group saying that this guy is actually obviously doing something interesting. So that's a good clue for me that he's influential. And here's a couple of others that are not on the list to add in. This guy Sean Rogers, a big data expert, and so on here, like PhD. He's also very clever. Only 2,000 followers, this fellow, but actually he's been referenced a lot by the big data peer group. And this is actually the most shared articles. It's also good to look at what are those key group of influencers referenced to. So maybe I should make sure I read this article and I'm aware of it, because this has been the most shared article amongst that peer group. So the key thing is to look for convergence. You remember I talked about the Forbes top 50 social media influencers at the beginning, right? Well, at Bracona, I said we have a database, we have thousands of journalists, and we track what they say in social media as well. So I've got a list here of 2,500 US tech journalists, and they talk about social media a lot. They've actually talked about they've mentioned social media about 10,000 times in the last month. Okay, so you'd think that the US tech journalists would probably be referencing the Forbes top 50 social media influencers, right? Because they're apparently the top 50 social media influencers, right? So what's the convergence like? Well, actually, it's rather small. There was only about 120 times in the last month of the 9,000 posts mentioning where the US tech journalists are talking about social media, where they actually mentioned anyone from the Forbes top 50. So you have to kind of question how influential are these top 50 influencers if no one who's actually paid to cover tech and social media actually mentions them. And if we look at we also track UK national journalists. They've got 3,000 UK national journalists. They mention them even less. And where they do mention them, this is one of the ladies on the list, it's often kind of sarcastic. You know, she sort of says, you know, today will be a great day for you. All things of working together feel good. Believe and see it. Expect breakthrough. Smiley face. Thanks, Sandy. You really cheered me up. Now, if anyone knows anything about British journalism, you'll know that that sort of comment is actually just purely sarcastic. You also have this sort of thing, you know, just imagine who you could become if you ever got over your excuses. And this guy says, oh, I could become a mountain. Cool. So that's the kind of engagement that some of these guys have had. But there are people who generally are influential. So one of the few people that were mentioned repeatedly was this fellow Chris Brogan. And again, if you look at him, he's only following 440 people, but he's got 285,000 followers. So he's really not trying hard to game the system, I don't think. And he's getting reference. You know, Chris Brogan, you know, he is probably influential. He does write some really great stuff. And this fellow as well, Gary Vaynerchuk, something like that. Gary V, easy to say that way. He's actually been mentioned the most, and you know, he's got, again, you know, 1 million followers on Twitter. So I'm not just looking at the social numbers. I'm actually looking at the people who are paid to cover this sort of thing, and they reference those two guys a lot. There are some others as well. So you know, there are some people on the Forbes top 50 who really are great and really are influential, but there's a lot who have to just game into system and don't have any impact on the media landscape at all. So also using peer references. So another thing we've just done is I looked at the US tech journalists. So those 2,500 US tech journalists, I programmed the system to tag any times where they talk about social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And the person that they mentioned the most, other than a publication, was actually this lady, Kashmir Hill. She was the most referenced, and she writes about privacy. And so she's actually been writing a few articles about Facebook and about their privacy settings and the things that they've done and how they've made some people angry, etc. So you know, maybe you look at her as being actually a real influencer on social media because she's writing content that's being shared by people who are in the know. And then in the UK, we've got Alex Hearn. He's a tech reporter for The Guardian, and he was actually the most referenced by the UK audience. So again, I'm using the kind of peer review to actually look at influencers rather than starting off with any kind of scoring system. So it's a much more kind of pure and organic. By the way, for those of you who are wondering, you know, why I'm focusing on Twitter, partly it's just in the interest of time because some of the methods that we have on other platforms are a bit different. But I'm also focusing on Twitter just because the other social networks tend to have a footprint on Twitter. The exception being maybe where you've got anonymous networks like forums, etc., where people don't want to post using their real name, and it's sometimes harder to see the real impact on a place like Twitter. But generally speaking, if someone who's got, you know, an impact on LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, there'll be some trace of their activity on Twitter as well, some clue that they're doing that. And as one last little kind of tip, just if you don't have any tools, you just want to get started, as long as you've got one person that you know is influential, you know, start with someone who's influenced in the real world. Probably most people know this already, but just in case you don't, check out the lists on Twitter. So when you see people's profiles, you go to more than lists, and then you go through there, you can see lists that they are subscribed to, so that's the ones that they're following. But the more important one is to look at lists where they're a member of. So this is where other people have recognized Cash Hill as being important, and they put them on a list. And often you can scroll down there, and then you can start to, so there's a list there by this guy, Jason Salentis, who's got 173 members, and there's also one above called Tech. So sometimes that can be a good way just to kind of almost crowdsource lists. So if you've got someone who's on a lot of lists, that can also be a clue that they're influential. So that's just a kind of maybe a quick go, just for anyone who's not got, you know, the budget for any tools, just a way to get started. But hopefully that's helpful. Just to conclude, this is the end of our three-part series. You know, if there's a demand for a full session, we'll do that. Also, just to say that we are going to be putting together a resource pack to cover the three sessions that we've had. If you've got any questions about, you know, how to engage or specific tips about those different types of influence groups, do get in touch because we're going to be putting together a follow-up blog and also an info pack. So we may go into some more detail there. But I really hope that's been helpful today. And I will just open the floor for some questions. Let's just, if I can get this question panel up.